Do you pine for the days of yore in the NHL when fighting was as central to the game as dirty dangles and sniping top cheddar? Well, you're in luck. Following an unprecedented period of relative pacifism in the NHL, fighting is in the midst of a resurgence at hockey's highest level. As we approach the midway mark of the 2021-2022 campaign, fights are breaking out at their highest rate in 5 years, while the number of fighting majors handed out per game has now increased for a third consecutive season after reaching an all-time low in 2018-2019. So, how did we get here exactly? And what could be fueling this renewed sense of combativeness? Let's break it down. Sit back, relax, and take this in. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind everyone that we're creeping closer to 100,000 subscribers, and we want you to help us get there. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to tell your friends. Anyway, I'm sure you've heard the old joke before, oh, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out, but that hyper-violent brand of hockey in which brawls routinely broke out and players were rostered explicitly for the purpose of fighting has been obsolete for a while now. The last decade and a half was particularly transformative in this regard. When Sidney Crosby won his first Stanley Cup back in 2008-2009, the NHL had an average of 0.6 fights per game, according to hockeyfights.com, and a whopping 173 regular season games that year featured multiple fights. That's the most in a single season since the turn of the century. However, by the time Sid won his second Stanley Cup in 2015-2016, the fights per game rate had plummeted to 0.28, less than half of what it was 7 years prior, and only 50 regular season games that year had multiple fights. By 2018-2019, the last pre-pandemic season, the NHL saw a record low 0.18 fights per game. Meanwhile, only 15.3% of games that year featured a fight, compared to 41.4% a decade prior. So what fueled that shift away from frequent fisticuffs? Well, for starters, increasing awareness over brain injuries and the links between fighting and concussions has profoundly changed many people's attitudes towards fighting in hockey. That cultural shift has led to more stringent anti-fighting measures in developmental hubs like Major Junior Hockey and even the American Hockey League, which has in turn made fighting a less prominent part of the NHL game. On top of that, the increasing use of analytics in the NHL has laid bare just how inefficient it is to carry a guy like Stu the Grim Reaper Grimson or Ty Domi. Tough guys who are more enforcers than hockey players. Still, while it's no longer in fashion to fill out your fourth line with goons, and while the days of constant scrapping and regular line brawls are very much behind us, fighting has made a notable resurgence over the last couple of seasons. This year, we're seeing 0.54 fighting majors handed out per game, an increase of 50% from the COVID-interrupted 2019-2020 season. Why is this happening? There's no shortage of plausible theories. For starters, it could just be a manifestation of the pandemic-induced frustration and anxiety that we've all been dealing with for almost 2 years now. Hockey players are human beings after all, and it'd be entirely understandable if they were feeling a bit testy these days.
Urge to kill rising.
Another theory? The addition of a 32nd team, the Seattle Kraken, created 23 bottom-of-the-lineup roster spots around the league. And at the risk of generalizing, the players filling out those spots weren't good enough to make the NHL last year and are doing whatever they can to make an impression, including fighting. It's also possible that one particularly pugilistic team could be driving this spike. Take out the Predators, who have gotten into more fights than the Stars, Hurricanes, Capitals, Oilers, Maple Leafs, Blue Jackets, and Devils combined, and the league-wide fights per game rate is much more in line with last year's mark. The main culprit here? Tanner Jeannot, who's already earned himself 8 fighting majors this season, the second most in the NHL. But he could also be a model, incidentally, for the fighter of the future. As inclined as Jeannot is to drop the mitts, he also leads all rookies in goals, sits top 5 in points, and has a legitimate shot to take home the Calder Trophy. He isn't just some lumbering bully.
It does other things!
Finally though, it's also possible that this year's surge is just a course correction after an unprecedented stretch of nonviolence, and that this season will help define what normal means in a league that's changed dramatically over the last couple decades and continues to evolve. But what say you? Is this surge a sign that fighting in hockey is making a full-on comeback? Or is this just a detour on the NHL's winding path to a future without fighting? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. As always, we appreciate you. We'll see you next time.